I'm the director of the Cyber Education and Research Center here at Murray State University, and welcome back to 10 at 10. 10 at 10 is brought to you through a partnership between Murray State University, Grow West, the Technology Council of West Kentucky, KY Innovation, and our local partners, Sprocket Innovation in Paducah and the Kentucky Innovation Station in Madisonville. So, welcome back to episode 136. So, today we're going to talk about Starlink, actually. Starlink was in the news about some security vulnerabilities, and I want to highlight that. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about what Starlink is. Starlink is a new satellite-based communication systems. SpaceX is, and Elon Musk is part of uh, Starlink. They started it, grew it. Satellite in the last decade and a half has been, maybe even 20 years, has been an option for broadband communications, and it has been really bad. It has been slow. It has had severe latency issues. And the latency issues is the time it takes to get it communicated. If you say go, how long does it take to go? And the latency pieces on satellite have traditionally been bad. And the reason for that is that it's in space. It's a far distance away to get to the satellite. Starlink has improved that. They're a little bit closer, lower orbit. There's more of them. The capacity doesn't have to be as large. There's a lot of things that are awesome about Starlink. The maps, the images I show are a couple images I found online showing their coverage. They have a ton of satellites in space. They're all over. If you go back to March of last year, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia cut off the communication system for Ukraine, and Starlink provided receivers to Ukraine, and Ukraine started using Starlink as their primary communication mechanism between their people, their government, their military, and the outside world. That was how they communicated because of being cut off in other methods. And so I talk about Starlink, and I talk about it because there's an article that came out. Articles dated August 15th, so a couple days ago, said recent intel report reveals new Starlink vulnerabilities, increasing concerns about the future of global satellite internet. So there's a couple of things well, it's an interesting article, it's an interesting read, but it talks about how that Russia is trying to block Starlink. It's talking about the vulnerabilities of satellite-based communication. And in this case, they're specifically trying to jam it so that the communication signal doesn't work. There's also concern about what they might be able to read on Starlink. But it is encrypted, so that should help out some. But there's a lot of vulnerabilities with Starlink. And it really got me thinking whether, you're using satellite communications, or there's a lot of different broadband communications, dial-up, DSL, cable modem, fiber, fixed wireless, mobile wireless, satellite. There's, T1s and there's a lot of dedicated connections that are either wired or wireless. And what happens too often is that we rely on them entirely, as in the case of Starlink, because that's the only option they have, or we rely on them in ways that maybe we shouldn't. And I want to just kind of dig into that a little bit more today, if that's all right. We have, actually, I'll show it. We have in security, there's a thing called the CIA triad. CIA representing confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Our job as cybersecurity professionals is to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data. That's our job. Now, there's a couple of other letters, non-repudiation and authorization and authentication. There's a lot of other letters that we talk about, but for years and years, for 20 years, for 25 years, there's at the very fundamental level of cybersecurity, your job is to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data. That confidentiality means that only those that are authorized to see it can see it. Availability means when you need it, it's there. If you're an authorized user and you need access to data, it's there. Integrity, meaning that it doesn't get altered unless an authorized user is altering it, is editing it. Those are the fundamental pieces of our job as cybersecurity professionals. That's what we do. Now, how do we do that? Well, there's a planning framework. Actually, there's a ton of planning frameworks. There's the NIST framework. There's the ISO 27001 framework. There's CIS controls. There's a ton of things that we can do. There's certifications or designations that entities can get showing that they have done a good job of planning for these different things. There's a ton of work that goes into that planning. And actually, I'm showing the cybersecurity framework version 1.1 from NIST on the screen. And I should point out that I think it's still in draft form, but there's a 2.0 version of this out. But in version 1.1, there's identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. If we're going to address security for an organization, we have to address all of those areas. And within those areas, there may be technology, there may be things that people need to do, and there may be processes. There's tons of things in each category that we need to do to ensure that we have done a proper job of securing our data's integrity, availability, and confidentiality. Now go back to that Starlink example. They are trying to jam the signal, the satellite uplink. That's one of the things that they're trying to do. That's an attack on the availability of the connection. That means that when somebody is trying to communicate, the signal is not there. It is the internet, the network, the connection back to the web or to the other endpoint is not there. So it is an attack on the cybersecurity state of that network. It's affecting the availability. So our jobs now is your company based in Ukraine? Probably not. Are you dealing with Ukraine soldiers? Probably not. Is that story going to be specifically applicable to you? I hope not. I doubt it. Maybe some. I know that some people that listen to 10 at 10 are military based or work with military organizations. So maybe it affects you a little bit. But I want to use this to tell you, if you have one internet connection, that internet connection might be impacted by an availability issue. Maybe it's not the Russians trying to jam your signal. Maybe it's a farmer that accidentally cut through a line. How many times has that happened? We joke about that example and use that example in cybersecurity a lot because it happens a lot in Kentucky. Somebody doesn't call before they dig and they cut a line, and sometimes it's a major line. A few years ago, we had a bridge get knocked out. There was a fiber line running on that bridge underneath the bridge span. That knocked out coverage to a lot. So there's a lot of availability issues that we need to be concerned about. We also need to be concerned about the integrity and confidentiality of that connection. You can't just assume whether it's a satellite link, a fiber connection, whatever it is, that it is secure and it's protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data. We have to go through that planning framework on every aspect of our network to make sure that we're addressing the availability, the integrity, the confidentiality of our data. That's our job as cybersecurity professionals no matter what. It's really interesting what's happening with Starlink right now. I think Starlink's fantastic. It is a great way to get broadband if you're in an area that can't get it. It's a great way to get broadband if you're on the move. But you have to go through the process of planning how to secure that network. That's the point of today. Don't assume that something's protected. Don't assume that something's secure. Don't assume that we have done everything that we need to do to protect our network. We have to proactively plan. We have to proactively put measures in place, controls in place to make sure that our infrastructure is protected. Maybe we'll start going through that over the next few months on steps that we can take planning wise to make sure that we're doing that. And where do we start? Probably start with assets. That's understanding what we're protecting is always a good start. Anyway, thank you for joining today for 10 at 10. I hope to see you next week back here on 10 at 10. Thank you. Bye.